Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of Say It With Me. Every coach was a Dolphin. We're going to go through some old Miami Dolphins teams that didn't win playoff games, but had absolute stars in the making on their coaching staff to show you, as a matter of fact, that every coach was a Dolphin. Let's start out with the 2015 team, led by head coach Joe Philbin, who later got fired. But look at his director of player personnel. Should look familiar if you're a Giants fan. Joe Shane, GM of the Giants, was the director of player personnel for the Dolphins. Moving on, when Joe Philbin got fired, who took over as the interim head coach and was previously the tight ends coach? Well, how about Lions now head coach Dan Campbell? And who else was on that staff? Another guy who became an interim head coach later on. You may know him as the special teams coordinator and assistant head coach of the Denver Broncos, Darren Rizzi. This is a particular favorite picture of mine. But Dan Campbell was not the only famous face on the offensive staff. You're going to look here and see Zach Taylor, head coach of the Bengals, was the quarterback's coach, later became the offensive coordinator. And then this is the big one on this 2015 Dolphins team. Who took over for Dan Campbell as the tight ends coach when Campbell was promoted to head coach? How about Chicago Bears superstar head coach Ben Johnson? And on top of that, how about one of the best defensive coordinators in the league, Lou Anarumo, being the DC in Miami at the time, along with the defensive backs coach. Now, this picture for the next team might look a little crazy if you've never heard of this, but Nick Saban at one point was the head coach of the Dolphins in 2005 and 2006. And his 2006 staff has some names you may know if you've been watching football for the last 20 plus years. Mike Mularkey became a head coach in spots. I think he was the head coach of the Titans at one point. How about him as the offensive coordinator under Nick Saban? Not only that, how about the quarterbacks coach, somebody who actually played quarterback in Miami for a very brief period of time, Mr. Clapp himself, Jason Garrett, was the quarterbacks coach under Saban. Then the DC, I genuinely thought this picture was AI, just looking at Don Capers' hair and then the shirt that he's wearing. It genuinely looks like it's photoshopped together. However, it's from Getty Images, so I'm going to assume it's real. Dom Capers was the DC famous assistant from Green Bay. And under Don Capers, how about another head coach, Dan Quinn, who was the defensive line coach in 2005 and 2006. This is sadly the only picture I could find of Dan Quinn around the time. You can't really find them of him in his Dolphins garb, but he was the defensive line coach. And then another big-time college head coach. There he is right next to Saban on the sideline. Kirby Smart, head coach of Georgia, was the defensive backs coach for this 2016. Now, a last little tidbit here, moving past the 2015 team onto the 2016 team, which had a new head coach, Adam Gase. And what's really funny is the defensive staff he put together is full of future defensive coordinators, starting off with the defensive coordinator who later became a head coach and is one of the best DCs in the league now. How about Vance Joseph, the defensive coordinator of that 2016 Dolphins team? This season is what made him the head coach in Denver. But he started off as the Dolphins defensive coordinator, or at least not started off, but that was one of his stops down the line. How about Matt Burke, who got promoted to Dolphins DC after Joseph left? Now he's the defensive coordinator in Houston, which is a top 5 defense in football. But it's not only those two. How about Lou Anarumo? Again, back on the staff, still one of the best defensive minds in the game. And he was on several different Dolphins staffs. And last, but certainly not least, doing this during Super Bowl week, it wouldn't be fair of me to not include somebody who's in the Super Bowl. How about Terrell Williams, the defensive coordinator of the New England Patriots? He was the defensive line coach on that 2016 team. So looking back through these years, you look at 2006, 2015, 2016, all of these teams had coaches who went on to have prominent roles. And honestly, most of them really good in those roles. And none of these teams won a playoff game. I know that one stings a little bit, but still, that is my favorite game. Every coach was a Dolphin. If you want to see more, please be sure to like and comment what teams also have crazy coaching trees.